Hey everyone, welcome back to Motivation Library. Today we are cracking open Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek.
Oh, classic.
It really is. It's become sort of a modern classic on leadership,
Hmm.
and for good reason. This book, it really challenges you to kind of rethink how you view teamwork and what truly drives success.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think what I love about Sinek's work is that he doesn't just stay on those surface level tips. He
right.
really dives into the deeper, human dynamics, the stuff that's at play within, high performing teams.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so fascinating and applicable to all of us. Whether we're leading a team at work, at home, in our communities, or just trying to be better teammates ourselves.
That's right.
So for anyone new here, Motivational Library is all about taking these incredible books that are just jam-packed with knowledge and extracting those golden nuggets of wisdom that you can actually use. I'm here to help guide us through the material, and more importantly, you're here to explain why these ideas matter and how they connect to the bigger picture. I'll do my best.
So, have you ever been part of a team that just clicks? Everyone's on the same page, supporting each other, achieving amazing things.
Absolutely.
And then on the flip side, we've all probably experienced those teams that just kind of exist. They get the work done, but there's no real spark. No sense of shared purpose.
Yeah, been there.
Leaders Eat Last dives deep into what separates those thriving teams from the ones that are just going through the motions. Sinek argues that it all boils down to creating what he calls a circle of safety.
Intriguing.
It is.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this concept, he shares some truly compelling stories,
Oh, I love a good story.
like the story of Johnny Bravo,
Wait, like the cartoon?
an A-10 pilot in Afghanistan. Sinek starts by painting this vivid scene, right? This is nighttime, thick cloud cover, and Johnny's flying high above the mountains. He's providing air support for troops on the ground.
Wow.
He can't even see the troops he's protecting, but he can hear the tension and fear in their voices over the radio.
Oh, I bet. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Johnny isn't just up there detached following orders. He feels deeply connected to those men on the ground. Even though it's incredibly risky, Johnny decides to do what's called a weather letdown.
Okay, I'm not a pilot, but that sounds dangerous.
He flies down through those dense clouds into a valley, knowing he could easily crash.
Why would he do that?
Because he feels responsible for those troops. He has to see for himself what's happening, even if it means putting his own life on the line. And just as he breaks through the clouds, he hears those chilling words crackle over the radio, "Troops in contact."
Wow.
It's a truly gripping story. It perfectly illustrates the next central point. True leadership is about prioritizing the well-being of the team above all else. It's not about ego or personal gain. It's about creating that circle of safety, that sense of trust and belonging where everyone feels protected and supported, just like Johnny Bravo did for those troops.
You know what strikes me about that? Johnny, he wasn't ordered to do that maneuver, right?
Right.
He acted out of a sense of, responsibility, his gut instinct to protect his people.
That's such a great point. And that brings us to a key insight. True leadership, it often goes beyond simply following orders or playing by the rules. It's about having the courage to act in the best interests of the team, even when it's difficult or risky.
It's true.
What I find really compelling is that, Sinek, he doesn't just present these abstract ideas.
Right.
He grounds them in these real-world examples that really bring the concepts to life.
I agree. The stories, yeah.
Like another one he shares is the story of Bob Chapman. He's the CEO of Barry Wimler, a manufacturing company.
Okay.
They were hit hard during the 2008 recession, and like many companies in their position, they had to make some tough decisions.
I remember that time. Tough for everybody.
Yeah. And most companies in that situation would have just resorted to mass layoffs.
Right. It's often seen as the most logical, right, just from a financial perspective.
Exactly. But Chapman did something radically different. He gathered all his employees and he said, "It's better that we all suffer a little so that none of us has to suffer a lot." Instead of layoffs, they implemented a mandatory furlough program. Everyone, from the CEO down to the newest hire, was required to take 4 weeks of unpaid leave.
Wow.
And what's so striking about this story is not just the decision itself, but the way Chapman framed it. He appealed to their shared humanity, emphasizing that they were all in this together. And the employees responded in this incredible way. Some people who were in a better financial position, they actually started voluntarily trading their weeks off
Really?
with colleagues who were struggling more.
That's amazing.
It's a remarkable example of how putting people first, even when it seems counterintuitive from a business perspective, can actually create a stronger, more resilient organization.
It really shows you the power of empathy in leadership.
Yes.
It's not about being soft. It's about recognizing that people are the heart of any organization. When you create that culture of trust and support,
Yes.
you unleash incredible potential.
Absolutely. And Sinek doesn't stop there. He takes us even deeper into the fascinating world of biology to explain why this kind of leadership is so effective. He talks about how our brains are actually wired for connection and cooperation. And when leaders can tap into that wiring, they unlock these extraordinary levels of motivation and performance in their teams.
Okay, so tell me more about that, this biological connection.
So he highlights 4 key chemicals in our brains that influence our behavior at work:
Okay.
endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin.
Okay, I'm familiar with a couple of those, but, break it down for us.
Okay.
Lay it on us.
First up, endorphins.
Okay.
Those are the ones that give us that, runner's high, right?
Yeah, it makes us feel good when we're pushing ourselves physically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Endorphins mask pain, help us power through challenges. So in a work setting, think about that sense of accomplishment you get after completing a difficult task or pushing through a long project.
Oh, yeah.
It's like our biology is rewarding us for hard work and perseverance.
So it's not just about avoiding pain.
Right.
It's about finding satisfaction in overcoming obstacles.
That's a great point. And then there's dopamine.
Okay.
This one is all about reward and motivation.
Uh-huh.
It drives us to achieve goals, seek out new experiences, and strive for that feeling of progress.
Okay.
Every time we check something off our to-do list or we get closer to a goal, we get that little hit of dopamine. It's what keeps us moving forward, reaching for more.
So dopamine is kind of like the fuel that keeps us going.
Yeah.
But is there a downside to, having too much of it?
That's a great question. And it's particularly relevant in today's fast-paced, achievement-oriented world. When we're constantly bombarded with deadlines, targets, and the pressure to succeed, we can get stuck in this dopamine loop.
Oh, yeah.
We're always chasing the next goal, the next reward, without ever really feeling satisfied.
Right. Yeah.
And that constant striving can lead to stress, burnout, a sense of emptiness, even when we're achieving those external markers of success.
So how do we balance that drive for achievement with, a sense of contentment and well-being? Is that where the other 2 chemicals come in?
Exactly. Serotonin and oxytocin play these crucial roles in creating that sense of balance and fulfillment that's often missing in dopamine-driven environments.
Right.
Serotonin is often called the leadership chemical.
Interesting.
It's about pride, recognition, and feeling like our contributions matter.
Uh-huh.
When we feel valued and appreciated for our work, when we know we're making a positive impact,
Yeah.
our serotonin levels increase, and we experience this deep sense of satisfaction and belonging.
So it's not just about achieving for ourselves. It's
Yeah.
about feeling like we're part of something bigger, something meaningful.
Exactly. And that sense of meaning and belonging is amplified by oxytocin, which is often called the trust or the love chemical. It's released when we feel safe, connected, and supported by others.
Yeah.
Think about the feeling you get when you hug a loved one or share a laugh with a close friend.
Oh, yeah.
That warm, fuzzy feeling.
Yeah.
That's oxytocin in action.
Huh.
And it plays a huge role in building trust and cooperation within teams.
Okay.
When people feel safe to be themselves, to take risks, to rely on each other,
Yeah.
oxytocin flows, strengthening those bonds and creating a more positive and productive work environment.
So Sinek is saying that in a healthy, thriving team, all 4 of these chemicals, they're working in harmony.
Yes. It's about finding that balance between striving for achievement, dopamine, feeling valued for our contributions, serotonin, and experiencing that sense of trust and belonging, oxytocin. And let's not forget those endorphins,
Right.
which help us power through challenges and find satisfaction in the struggle.
Yeah, I like that.
Now, here's where things get really interesting. Sinek argues that many modern workplaces, with their emphasis on individual achievement, competition, and short-term goals, create an imbalance in these chemicals.
Interesting.
We get too much dopamine, not enough serotonin and oxytocin, and that leads to a breakdown in trust and collaboration,
Yeah.
and ultimately well-being.
Yeah, we're wired for connection, but operating in a system that's pushing us towards isolation and self-interest.
Exactly. And to illustrate the potential dangers of this imbalance, Sinek brings in this fascinating but rather unsettling psychological study, the the Milgram experiment.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Isn't that the one where they had people deliver electric shocks to others?
Yes, it was a controversial experiment conducted back in the 1960s. It explored the power of authority and obedience. Basically, they had volunteers believe they were participating in a study about learning and memory.
Uh-huh.
They were instructed to deliver electric shocks to another person who was actually an actor pretending to be in pain every time they got an answer wrong.
Right.
And the shocks got progressively stronger with each wrong answer.
Oh, wow.
And what they found was truly shocking. A surprisingly high percentage of people were willing to deliver the highest level of shock, even though they believed it could be fatal, simply because a figure of authority the experimenter told them to.
That's disturbing. So people were essentially willing to inflict pain on others just because someone in a lab coat told them to.
Exactly. And it raises some really important questions about human nature and the power of situational influence. How could ordinary people be persuaded to do something so seemingly cruel?
Yeah.
Sinek connects this experiment to the modern workplace by highlighting the parallels. He argues that when people feel unsafe, when there's a lack of trust in leadership, when they fear the consequences of speaking up or questioning authority, they're more likely to comply, even if it means going against their own values or better judgment.
It's like that pressure to conform, right?
Yes.
That fear of rocking the boat can override our own moral compass.
And that's where the circle of safety comes in.
Right.
When leaders prioritize creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, to challenge ideas, to admit mistakes without fear of reprisal, they're essentially creating the antidote to the conditions that allowed the Milgram experiment to unfold. They're fostering a culture where people feel empowered to do the right thing, even when it's difficult.
That's a really powerful connection.
It is.
It makes you think about, like, your own work experiences in a whole new light.
Right.
I'm already starting to see how this applies to, like, my own team,
Yeah.
and the dynamics at play. Makes me think about the times I've, felt pressured to go along with decisions I didn't agree with, maybe out of fear of, losing my job or damaging my reputation. It's like that feeling of being trapped in a system where you don't have a voice.
Exactly. And that's precisely the kind of environment that Sinek argues we need to move away from. He believes that the shareholder-first mentality, while seemingly logical on the surface, has actually created a culture of fear and self-preservation in many organizations.
It's true.
Instead of prioritizing the well-being of their employees and creating a sustainable long-term vision, too many companies are just focused on maximizing short-term profits. Even if it means cutting corners, exploiting their workers, or damaging the environment, it's like they're sacrificing their future for a quick buck. And in the process, they're eroding the very foundation of trust and cooperation that's essential for long-term success.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this point, Sinek contrasts two very different approaches to leadership.
Yeah.
Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE,
Right.
and James Sinegal, the co-founder of Costco.
Okay, I know those names.
Welch was known for his ruthless focus on shareholder value, efficiency, and what he called rank and yank,
Oh, yeah, rank and yank.
a system where the bottom 10% of performers were routinely fired. He was nicknamed Neutron Jack
Oh, wow.
for his ability to increase profits while drastically cutting jobs.
Yeah.
While Welch definitely achieved some impressive short-term results, his methods ultimately eroded GE's culture, and they created a climate of fear and anxiety.
Makes sense.
Employees were constantly worried about being the next to get yanked, and this fear stifled innovation and collaboration.
Right.
Sinegal, on the other hand, took a radically different approach. He prioritized his employees' well-being, paying them fair wages, offering generous benefits, creating a culture of respect and appreciation. He believed that happy, well-compensated employees would provide better customer service, which would in turn lead to increased profits. And guess what?
What?
He was right.
I bet.
Costco thrived under his leadership, and it continues to thrive today,
Yeah.
even after Sinegal's retirement. It's a perfect example of how putting people first isn't just the right thing to do, it's also good business. It's about creating a win-win situation where everyone benefits.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. Now, here's where Sinek throws in another curveball. He argues that technology, while connecting us in many ways, can also hinder the development of real, trusting relationships.
That's so relevant, especially in our, hyper-connected world where we're constantly bombarded with information and notifications.
Right.
It can be overwhelming.
Sinek argues that the overuse of technology, particularly social media, can actually make us more isolated and less capable of forming those deep, meaningful connections.
Yeah.
And-
It's like we're trading real relationships for those fleeting virtual ones.
Yes, and it's particularly concerning for younger generations who have grown up immersed in technology.
Right.
It's almost like they've been conditioned to expect instant gratification and struggle with delayed rewards, which are essential for building strong relationships and achieving long-term goals.
So how do we combat this tendency towards isolation and instant gratification in a world that's, increasingly dominated by technology?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll dive into more deeply in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, I want to leave you with this thought. The key to building strong teams, fostering trust, and achieving lasting success is to remember that we are, at our core, social creatures. We crave connection, belonging, and a sense of purpose. And it's up to leaders to create environments that nurture those needs, both within organizations and in society as a whole.
I love that.
And that's a great place to pause for now.
Okay.
Join us for part 2, where we'll explore some specific strategies for building those stronger circles of safety in our workplaces and lives.
Sounds good. I'm ready. Okay. So are we ready to dive back into Leaders Eat Last?
Let's do it. Last time we talked about how true leadership is about prioritizing the well-being of the team, creating a circle of safety that Simon Sinek emphasizes throughout the book.
And of course, we can't forget about those brain chemicals.
Right. Endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin.
How they kind of drive our behavior at work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And how the modern workplace, with its intense focus on individual achievement and hitting those short-term goals,
Yeah, it's all about the hustle, right?
it can actually create an imbalance in those chemicals.
Leading to a lack of trust.
Yes.
Genuine cooperation.
It's like we're wired for connection,
right.
but the system is pushing us towards self-interest.
And then that Milgram experiment.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of unsettling, right?
It is.
It's a stark reminder of how easily people can be persuaded to do unethical things when they lack a strong circle of safety
Right.
and feel that pressure to just obey authority.
It makes you think, right, about times when maybe we've gone along with something we didn't fully agree with just because we were afraid to speak up.
For sure. Or challenge the status quo.
It highlights how crucial it is to create a culture where people feel safe to voice their concerns,
Yeah.
to disagree respectfully.
And to know that their perspectives are valued.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Sinek takes this idea even further. He introduces this concept of abstraction.
Abstraction.
He argues that as organizations grow larger, more complex, they tend to become more abstract, focused on numbers, metrics, shareholder value, rather than the actual human beings that they impact.
Losing sight of the forest for the trees.
Yeah, we get so caught up in the big picture, right?
Yep.
The spreadsheets, the quarterly reports, and we forget about the real people behind those numbers. He has this great line that really stuck with me. He says, when we're abstracted from the people our decisions affect, we're more likely to make bad ones.
So true. It's easy to make decisions that seem logical on paper, but if you don't consider the human impact, those decisions can have some unintended consequences.
Right.
I'm thinking about that example Sinek gives. It's the one comparing the Syrian civil war to a single car accident.
Right.
We hear about thousands of people dying in a conflict and, we feel a sense of sadness, but then we read about, a single person's tragic accident and we're deeply moved. It's almost like our brains are wired to connect more easily with individual stories than with these large-scale statistics.
And that's a crucial insight for leaders to grasp, right?
Yeah.
When we're distanced from the people we lead, whether it's by physical distance, layers of bureaucracy, or just simply a lack of empathy, it becomes easier to make decisions that might seem rational in the abstract, but have devastating consequences for real people.
Right.
It's like that example of the air traffic controller. Remember, who broke protocol to save a plane full of passengers?
Well, yeah, he was willing to risk his career.
Yes.
Because he saw those passengers as people, not just blips on a radar screen.
Right. He understood the human stakes involved, and that made all the difference. So how do we combat this tendency toward abstraction, in our organizations, in our own lives?
Right. Big question.
Sinek, he offers some practical advice. First, he says, keep it real. Bring people together. Encourage face-to-face interaction. Prioritize that real human connection over those fleeting virtual interactions.
Right.
It's about being intentional. Create those opportunities for people to connect on a deeper level, to see each other as human beings, not just colleagues or employees. And this leads to a second piece of advice.
Okay.
Create a culture of shared struggle.
Shared struggle.
He argues that when people face challenges together, side by side,
Yeah.
they build stronger bonds, a sense of camaraderie, that we're all in this together mentality. It fosters trust and resilience.
Like going through boot camp.
Yes.
Or running a marathon together.
To come out the other side.
Right?
With a shared experience that binds you together in a way that nothing else can.
I like that. So he talks about how in the past, right, hardship, it often brought people together.
Right.
Think about wartime rationing or communities coming together after a natural disaster. People had to rely on each other.
Yeah.
And that created a sense of solidarity, of shared purpose. But in today's world, we're so isolated from each other,
Right.
We're all dealing with our own struggles in private.
It's like we've lost that sense of collective purpose, that feeling of being part of something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And it's a problem because as social creatures, we thrive on connection.
Yes.
And belonging. We need to feel like we're contributing to something meaningful, something that makes a difference.
So how do we create that sense of shared struggle in the modern workplace? I mean, do we have to manufacture crises?
That's a good question.
Right.
I don't think we necessarily need to create artificial challenges.
Okay.
It's more about finding ways to, bring people together, to work on common goals, to celebrate those successes together, and to support each other through challenges.
Right.
It's about creating a culture where it's okay to ask for help, admit mistakes, and learn from each other. A culture where vulnerability is seen as a strength, not a weakness.
I love that. And that leads us to Sinek's final piece of advice, which is focus on a cause bigger than ourselves. Having a purpose beyond just profits can be incredibly motivating.
It's true.
It's like that example with Barry Wemler. They didn't just lay people off during a recession.
Right.
They implemented that furlough program that required everyone to share the burden.
Right.
And because they were all working toward this common goal, keeping the company afloat, protecting their colleagues, they were able to rally together.
Wow.
And come through stronger on the other side. They had this shared purpose that transcended their individual self-interest.
Yeah.
And that made all the difference.
So it's about having a mission that resonates with people.
Yes.
On an emotional level, something that makes them feel like they're part of something bigger
Yeah.
than just their own individual goals.
Exactly. And Sinek argues that this sense of purpose, this feeling of contributing to something truly meaningful, is essential for long-term fulfillment, and engagement.
Engagement, for sure.
It's like that old saying, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Yeah.
If you can articulate a compelling why, you'll inspire people to follow you.
Right. And that brings us back to that idea of service,
Yeah.
that we touched on earlier. Sinek believes that true leadership, it's ultimately about serving others.
Yes.
About creating that circle of safety where people feel protected and valued. It's about shifting our focus from me to we, from self-interest to the well-being of the group.
And it's not just about making these grand gestures or heroic sacrifices. It's about those everyday acts of kindness, empathy, and support that build trust and strengthen relationships. Those small, consistent actions, that create a ripple effect of positivity. Now, Sinek also delves into the dangers of what he calls the abstraction of scale.
Abstraction scale.
As organizations grow larger and more complex, it becomes easier to see people as numbers, statistics.
Right.
Just cogs in a machine.
It's like that old saying, one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic.
Right. It's harder to empathize with large-scale suffering.
Yeah.
Because it feels so abstract, so distant.
Right.
And this abstraction can lead to some pretty dangerous behaviors. Sinek gives this example of the PAD-GO strike back in 1981,
Okay.
where President Reagan fired over 11,000 air traffic controllers who went on strike.
Wow.
That was a pivotal moment in labor history and a very controversial decision. Sinek argues that Reagan's decision, while perhaps understandable in the context of, the Cold War and the need to maintain national security, it sent a message to corporate leaders that it was acceptable to prioritize profits over people. It reinforced that shareholder-first mentality that we've been talking about.
So Sinek contrasts Reagan's approach with Bob Chapman's.
Exactly. who chose to implement the furlough program rather than lay off employees during the recession.
Right. He saw his employees as people, not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right. And he acted accordingly.
And his actions really proved that this approach, it isn't just ethical, it's incredibly effective in the long run.
Yes. So we've talked about these dangers of abstraction, but how do we make things more concrete, more human? Especially in a large organization where it's so easy to lose sight of the individual. Sinek suggests a few strategies.
Okay.
First, make the impact of our work visible.
Okay.
Instead of just focusing on those abstract metrics, find ways to connect people to the real-world outcomes of their efforts.
Right.
Help them see the difference they're making, in the lives of others.
Yeah, make it real.
Exactly. For example, you work for a company that makes medical devices. Arrange for employees to meet with patients who have benefited from their products. Or if you work for a nonprofit, have volunteers share stories about the people they've helped. It's about making that connection,
Right.
between the work we do and the lives that we're impacting. Another strategy, celebrate individual contributions,
Oh, I like that.
not just team accomplishments.
Instead of just focusing on hitting those big goals, take the time to acknowledge,
Yes.
appreciate those individual efforts that went into achieving them.
A simple thank you, a handwritten note, a public acknowledgement.
Yeah.
It can go a long way in making people feel seen and valued. It's about creating a culture where people feel like they're making a real difference, not just going through the motions.
And recognizing and appreciating the unique talents and contributions of each person.
Exactly. And this brings us to another critical point, the importance of leadership by example.
Oh, yeah.
Sinek argues that leaders need to embody those values they want to see in their organizations.
Absolutely.
If you want your team to be collaborative, you need to be collaborative. You want them to be ethical. Guess what? You need to be ethical. People, they don't just follow what you say, they follow what you do.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And Sinek gives some great examples of leaders who, led by example, like Captain David Marquet.
Okay.
He transformed the culture of a nuclear submarine, the USS Santa Fe, by empowering his crew and creating this culture of trust and responsibility.
Wow, that's a tough environment to do that in.
It is. His story is a fascinating example of how one leader can make a huge impact just by shifting the mindset of an entire organization. He moved away from that traditional command and control leadership style to one that emphasized shared responsibility and decision-making.
And that approach, it didn't just improve morale, right? It also made the submarine operate more efficiently and safely.
And Marquet's approach highlights another important point, the need to delegate control and empower people to make decisions. Instead of micromanaging and trying to control everything from the top down, trust your people to do their jobs, give them the autonomy to solve problems and innovate.
Right. When you give people that level of trust and responsibility, they're more likely to rise to the occasion, exceed your expectations.
Yeah.
They feel that sense of ownership,
Right.
and they're more invested in the outcome.
It's like that old saying, the best leaders are the ones who make themselves unnecessary. So to wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's recap some of the key strategies for combating abstraction and building stronger circles of safety within organizations.
Okay.
Make the impact of our work visible. Celebrate individual contributions. Lead by example. And empower people to make decisions.
I like it.
These are all powerful strategies for creating a more human-centered workplace, where people feel valued, trusted, and inspired to do their best work.
Right. And it all comes back to remembering that organizations are made up of people,
Yes.
not just numbers or metrics.
Exactly. And when we prioritize the well-being of our people, we create a more sustainable, fulfilling environment for everyone. And that's what Leaders Eat Last is all about, right? Creating a world where people feel safe, valued, and inspired to contribute their best.
Love it. There's still so much more to explore in Leaders Eat Last. What do you think? Ready for part 3?
I am ready.
Let's go. All right, diving into the final part of Leaders Eat Last.
We've covered so much ground already, but there's still so much to unpack.
I know. From that circle of safety to those brain chemicals and the dangers of abstraction, Sinek really gives us a lot to think about.
And don't forget how that focus on shareholder value, it might seem logical on the surface, but
Right, but it can really backfire, like building a house on sand. Looks good for a while, but eventually.
the whole thing collapses. We talked about some strategies for combating that, making work impactful, celebrating those whims.
Leading by example.
Yeah.
Giving people the power to actually make decisions.
It all goes back to treating people like people, not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. And that's what sets the stage for this last part, where Sinek dives into some, I think, really profound ideas about integrity, purpose, what it truly means to be a leader.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
One of the most thought-provoking things he talks about is integrity. He says, integrity is when our words and deeds are consistent with our intentions.
So it's more than just, like, being honest or following rules.
It's about living those values even when it's hard, even when nobody's looking, like that inner compass guiding you.
I like that. He has that story about a Marine officer candidate who falls asleep on watch.
Oh, yeah.
And when confronted, he denies it, even with evidence.
Yeah.
It's not until he realizes he's caught that he says, I want to take responsibility.
But isn't there a bigger point there? Like, taking responsibility after you're caught isn't really integrity.
Exactly. The colonel in the story says, taking responsibility happens when you do the thing, not when you get caught.
Powerful.
And Sinek argues that this type of integrity, it's becoming rare, especially in the business world. There's this pressure to get results.
Right, so sometimes people cut corners, they compromise their values, like the ends justify the means kind of thinking.
When that's how we operate, it just erodes trust.
Yeah.
Creates a culture of, like, cynicism.
He uses Bank of America as an example. Remember when they tried to implement that debit card fee? Then there was a public outcry, and they quietly backed down.
But they never actually admitted they were wrong?
Right. No apology for the inconvenience. More concerned about looking good than doing the right thing.
And that erodes trust. Creates an environment where honesty and transparency are less likely.
Sends the message that short-term gains are more important than those relationships.
And that's why integrity is so crucial for leaders.
It sets the tone for everything.
When leaders consistently demonstrate that integrity, people feel safe to take risks, to speak up, to trust that their leaders have their back.
Thinking back to Bob Chapman and that furlough program.
His employees trusted him.
They knew he was a man of his word, that he cared about them.
And wouldn't just sacrifice them to boost profits.
That's why they were able to get through that tough time.
So integrity is like the bedrock of that strong circle of safety.
Without it, everything crumbles.
Now, going beyond integrity,
Sinek also talks about purpose.
having a cause bigger than ourselves.
Right, something that makes our work meaningful.
This is what gets people truly motivated.
When we feel like we're part of something bigger, contributing to something positive, that's more rewarding than any bonus check.
It's a deep human need.
To make a difference.
And Sinek points out, in the past, people often found that sense of purpose in religion, their community, family traditions.
But now it's different.
Right.
People are looking for meaning in their work.
They want to be part of something bigger than themselves.
And when organizations can tap into that,
It's powerful.
it is.
Like charity. Water. They send a photo and GPS coordinates of your donation helped build.
Oh, yeah. It makes it real.
It takes that abstract idea of giving back and makes it personal.
Connects people to the actual impact of their actions.
And Sinek believes that's essential for both us as individuals and for organizations to be successful.
Think about companies like Patagonia or Tom & S shoes. They're driven by more than just profits.
Right. Sustainability, giving back.
They attract passionate people, people who really believe in their mission.
It's like they're saying, we're here to make money, but we're also here to make a difference.
And people respond to that.
And that's what true leadership boils down to.
Inspiring others.
To achieve something great, something that goes beyond just us.
Leaving a mark on the world.
So as we finish this deep dive into Leaders Eat Last, I want to leave you with one final thought from Simon Sinek. He says, leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of the people in your charge.
Such a simple but profound statement.
It is. Leadership, it's not a title, it's a responsibility.
We all have that potential, whether we're a CEO or a parent or a volunteer.
We can choose to be leaders in our own spheres, to prioritize others, create those circles of safety, and inspire those around us to achieve great things.
Making the world a little bit better, one act of leadership at a time.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Leaders Eat Last.
It's been a real pleasure exploring these ideas.
Be sure to check out our other episodes, and don't forget to subscribe to Motivation Library for more deep dives into personal and professional growth.
See you next time!